time aboard. This is the Miles to Go podcast. And now here's your host, Ed Pizza.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Miles to Go podcast. We were off the rails before we were even on the rails, and we are tuning in again with our good friend Julian from PointsPath to talk about what your points and miles are actually worth. And we're going to get into that in just a minute. But first, Mr. Kerr, the entire audience wants to know, have you bought the one-legged cart yet? Or like, what are we doing? How are we getting through the airport? We got to know. We need the update, the full update on the pickleball injury.
This is great because Julian doesn't have any context on this.
No, I don't listen to the podcast, so I don't know what you're talking about.
True.
Go ahead, Richard.
No, I head to New York City. Julian, you'll be excited about this. If Julian was on time, we were going to talk about this before we started recording. But I headed to New York City on Sunday for 2 weeks again with the Kerr family. And we're just going to get on Julian's social calendar. But unfortunately, I tore my calf muscle Friday a week ago playing pickleball. And I'm off the crutches. I'm going to hobble it assistance-free through the airport and all the good stuff. So looking forward to a pain-free, carefree 2 weeks in New York City.
Didn't you just start pickleball? Like literally?
Yeah, this was in the first 3 weeks of playing pickleball. I just horribly injured myself.
All right,
I'm that athletic.
Not the sport for you, yeah.
If there's any confusion about how athletic I am, everybody be rest assured now.
All right, I have more questions, but first, a little housekeeping. If you're just tuning into the show, you can text us or send us a voicemail at 571-293-6659. You can email the show, ed@pizzainmotion.com is how you get that done. He is at KerrPoints on all those social media channels. I am at Pizza in Motion. And Julian, recently out of Instagram jail, does have his Instagram account back. There's one for PointsPath. Where should people find you, Mr. Kheel?
Yes, I am back on Instagram, Julian Kheel, at Julian Kheel, and then, of course, at PointsPath.
Love it. So yeah, lots of questions to get into, but if you're watching on YouTube, if you could hit the subscribe button to our channel and give us a like, we'd love that. Same if you're listening on the audio podcast, although you don't get to see the three of us, which some people say is a real treat. I haven't met those people yet, but some people say is a real treat. So if you're listening to the show, love it if you give us a like and a follow there as well. Those are super helpful to us. So Mr. Kerr, are you flying with the family?
I'm not. So I'm flying up on Sunday, and I have a full day of meetings on Monday and a business dinner. So really no point in family being there. So they come up Tuesday, so 2 days after me. And got the same setup as last time. The folks over at the Hyatt Grand Central are just incredibly kind to give us the Kerr mansion up there on floor 32. I'm just kidding. It's not 32nd floor because I don't want anybody to come knock on the door. But except for Julian.
Actually, well, that's okay. We're going to include that in the tweet that we sent out because I'm also going to be tweeting to see if there's anybody in Atlanta who's willing to follow you through the airport and take video of how you maneuver with the torn calf muscle.
It's kind of weird.
We'll call these dedicated fans. We'll be looking for a dedicated fan to follow you through the airport.
I think we can get Richard's wife to do that. I think she'd happily send that video over.
I said dedicated fan, to be clear.
She's dedicated.
Committed, I think, was the word you were looking for. Committed.
They're almost synonymous. They're very close.
Almost, very, very close. All right, so let's get a discussion about points and their value. Julian put together a dashboard from PointsPath that I think is incredibly interesting for nerdy folks like Richard and I, and we want to dig into that. But Julian, take like just a minute for folks who maybe haven't heard you on the show before to talk a little bit about what PointsPath is to give us a little bit of context here.
Yeah, what we're trying to help people, because everyone who has frequent flyer miles has two problems, right? They can never find flights they actually want to use their miles on, and even when they do, they can't figure out if they're getting a good deal or not. So that is what PointsPath is trying to solve. It is a browser extension, works in both Google Chrome and Microsoft Edge. You install it, then you search with Google Flights, and in addition to the cash prices that Google gives you for all the flights in your search, we go through and add all the points values for all the different airlines and then tell you for each flight which is the better deal. So in the process of that, every time a user does a search and gets the cash and points prices, we keep a copy of that, not the user data, but the award data. And that way we're able to, as Ed said, create some calculations and do some analysis of that data and really get a feel of how much points are worth in each program.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, the biggest problem that I see, I mean, not the biggest, but the one I see come up so frequently are folks who earn a bunch of miles on a card and then they spend the points for whatever the next trip is, regardless of whether they're getting a good value or not. And no question, looking at some of the data here, It definitely seems like there's some of that when I look at some of these values. I'll admit, I was a little surprised overall looking at the numbers. I'd say at a high level before we talk about numbers. It was interesting to me that American Airlines had the most number of queries amongst the big three airlines. I would have expected that to be a little bit closer between the big three, but I thought it was interesting that American sort of led the way on terms of the number of people who were searching for flights on PointsPath.
Well, to be fair, that's probably also a bit of an artifact of the data because American was one of our first airlines up, so it just has more historical data than the other two. But what the other thing to keep in mind about our data is that when you look at a search on Google Flights, if there is basic economy cash fare, Google will show it. And it doesn't really indicate it in any way that it's a basic economy fare versus for most airlines, there is no basic economy points or miles fare. Delta is the big exception there. So there's a little bit of an apples to oranges comparison being done here. But what we have done is we've done a little digging as to what that difference is. And basically, except for Delta, you'd probably be adding about 0.2 cents to our numbers in order to get an apples to apples comparison, where you're looking at regular economy versus regular economy.
I think, Ed, you should go down and give folks a rundown of the numbers by airline.
Interestingly enough, I do think that the general values, like even if you disagree with the numbers, I think these median values are about where I'd align in that if you told me to rank which miles I thought were worth the most out of, and we'll just say American, Delta, United for now, although, PointsPath has data in here on JetBlue and Air France and Air Canada, I would typically think that I would get the most value out of my American miles if I was using them smartly. And then secondarily, United, and then lastly, Delta. And the numbers roughly line up there. So when we look at it aggregated for American Airlines, that median number is 1.26 cents. And as you said, you add a couple points there.
Right. So 1.3, 1.4, somewhere like that. Yeah.
Yep. And also, too, I mean, this is a combination of business and economy fares, which we'll get into in a little bit more detail, because there was one surprise there for me on that. United, a bit further behind that, 1.2, call that, in that same 1.3, 1.4 range. And then Delta noticeably lower than both of those at just over a penny per point, which is about where I'd value the Delta points. And even though you're saying like add a couple of tenths of a point, I thought was interesting was with Delta.
But not for Delta, because Delta has basic economy awards. So Delta's right on the money. Yeah, and it's pretty consistently 1.1 right down every cabin.
Yeah, no, fair point. And I think the thing that I'd also noticed, and then I want to get Richard's opinion here, the thing that I also noticed to your point on the 1.1 per cabin, it's like their business class fares are right in line with where their economy value per mile is versus American and United. Customers who are using PointsPath are getting more value when they're booking premium cabin, which is what I absolutely expect.
Right. And also in our dashboard, as you saw, we show average values. Mm-hmm. And the reason that we don't use that on PointsPath ourselves is average value gets very much pulled up by the extreme redemptions, the $20,000 first class flight that on United they could fly with 110,000 miles or whatever that might be. But when you look at that average, that sort of does give you the sense of, well, what's really like a huge redemption, a really valuable redemption that you could potentially get. It's not what we would use to value miles, but it does kind of give you like, what's the upside? What's the potential upside?
Yeah, some of these upsides, like the average cents per mile, I'm looking at international only.
It's pretty like crazy. Yeah,
19.56 for American, 1,021.61 cents per mile on Delta.
That I believe is a data error somewhere.
Okay, I was like, what is that?
Yeah.
But United is like 60. When you look like, so pretty ridiculous things. And I mean, my overarching comment here about the work that Mr. Kheel has done is a lot of people have tried to tackle this question, including me back in my TPG days, where I think about what we did 5-6 years ago, where we just like stick our finger up in the air and we're like, yeah, we think it's about 2.2. Like this is, and then other people like Award Wallet have gone and said, look, we've done the redemptions, but Award Wallet are 98% maximizers, so not normal people. Right. Whereas this is the first time I've seen a data set that is regular people on Google Flights that kind of answers this question from a quantitative perspective, where Julian's not out there with his windmill, gauging the direction of the wind that day for how much points are worth. Yeah, I think you should create a PDF, and in the Miles to Go Slack community, you could charge people 3 sticks of bubble gum so they could take a look at this.
We might be able to do that. Maybe
you could have all the chewing gum in the world for a year, and people could look at these actually really incredible, interesting numbers to see
maybe even go a step further and give them the link on it. Put the link there.
No, we got to charge
Well-
them sticks of bubble gum.
Oh, six.
Well, yeah, but if we gave them the link, to be clear, you may have to treat them a little bit better than you treated me, because just for clarity for folks, when we were going through the portal, Julian has a little drop-down menu that says routes on it, and you can select. There are three choices: all, domestic, and international. And Julian, in the utmost show of respect for me, asked if I was able to figure out how to use that drop-down menu when he sent the portal. So
I think it was a fair question, knowing what I know about you and your skill set.
To be fair, 3 years ago, I probably wouldn't have been able to do it. So I've made a lot of progress in the day job.
I appreciate
No,
it.
what
Well,
I
I'm
was
sure-
pointing out to Ed is that I said anything that is not within the United States entirely is considered international, even though flights like Canada, U.S. to Canada, are often sold as domestic first by the airlines and that sort of thing. So that's the point I was trying to make. I have full respect for your skill set.
See, just like that, he's trying to earn his next spot on the show, Mr. Kerr. I don't know. We may have to defer to Richard to make this decision. I'm a little
It's
biased.
the only way I get to hear the podcast is by being on it.
Yeah. That's true.
So, Richard, I'm curious. Did the setting aside the two separate questions? Setting aside the actual numbers for just a second, did the ranking, American highest value, United second highest, Delta third, did that align with what your expectations would be on the data?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. I find it interesting as I click what I like to look at here as I got my hands on this dashboard is the domestic versus international redemptions, and in some cases how similar they are, where it's not changing value much, and in other cases like people are getting a lot more value on American booking international routes than domestic. And my experience lately has been that the domestic redemptions on American are ridiculous value. Like when I just booked the entire extended family out to Jackson Hole for 5,000 American miles each, and some of the other routes that are on there. So I think it's fantastic data that nerds like myself are going to really enjoy. But no surprises here looking out of it. Julie, do you have a couple of international programs on here? Not a lot of data yet on Flying Blue to draw any conclusions, but I mean, Aeroplan, again, no surprises here, but we're looking at median cents per mile across it, 1.55, which is the highest. Sorry, no, Alaska's 1.62, so Alaska highest. But Alaska and Airplane being the most valuable, well, there's absolutely no surprise there for any of us, I don't think, in these results.
Yeah, I have exactly the same reaction when I look at these. I think these very much align with what we as a points and miles community have thought, sticking our finger in the wind. It does obviously put a lot more precision on it, but I think directionally it matches what we've all sort of felt as, at least recently. And that's good. To me, that sort of confirms that the data is probably correct.
Well, I think one other interesting thing, too, that I drew from the data, because Richard commented on the fact that Air France and Alaska Air Canada and Alaska were the two of the higher redemption values in the dashboard. I think, I've always had this philosophy, and actually, Sean in the Slack community and I were having this debate back and forth about what the value of a Delta Sky Mile is. And look, I mean, anybody can claim the value is whatever they got for their most recent redemption. But the question that I think we're trying to answer is a slightly different question. Like, what are people generally going to get using this currency on a regular basis? What's the average Joe or Jane expecting to get from their miles? And I think what the data shows, not to say it's confirmation bias, what the data shows, I think we'd all agree, most people aren't booking flights using Air Canada, Aeroplan, and Alaska. Most people are in the U.S. are booking through one of the big three carriers, right?
Yes.
And so the people in this case who are using Alaska and are using Aeroplan, those are what we would all affectionately refer to as the sharper folks, the nerds, the folks who are trying to get the most value. So it doesn't surprise me that those numbers also skew higher, because I think there are a lot of people who, like Richard, you talked about it in our Delta Everything You Need to Know episode. A lot of people in Atlanta who just have the credit card, put all their spend on it, and when it's time to go book their next trip, they're using their Sky Miles, and they're not getting the best bang for their buck that they could if they use a different strategy. And I think the data points to this.
Yeah, I literally got DM 1,473 this morning from local Atlanta folks that said, "Hey, I have the Amex Delta Gold. What card should I be looking at?" And I'm like, "Not that one.
Not that one.
First of all, you need to get
Should
rid
I
of
get
that
another one? No.
Yeah, which For Delta specifically, this is not taking into account, obviously, the 15% discount that people will get because you don't know if they're a card holder or not when they're
That is
switching to
correct.
the flights.
Yeah, that will. So we have that feature probably about a week away. That is coming very soon to PointsPath, where you will be able to flip a switch. If you have a Delta Amex, then you will get Delta Amex pricing versus regular pricing. Yeah, that will. We are also assuming, like I said, for standard Delta flights, we assume a median value of 1.1 based on our data. For 15% off, we'll assume 1.3. So that gives you a rough idea. Now, obviously, with partners, that's a little different, but that's basically what we're going with as a rule of thumb.
I mean, looking at some of this, right? So I've been a United flyer it's been over a year now. It's been about 14 months. And one of my key reasons was I wanted to collect United miles and not Sky miles on all of my business travel. Well, I think we've seen over the last 6 months, and I sent you a couple screenshots when I was actually looking to fly the family up to Newark, and it was like 30,000 United miles per person to fly Atlanta to Newark. I'm like, man, the days of old. And now looking at this literal data as well, I'm like, with the exception of international premium cabins, which Delta is just never going to be able to do for you, and United still can, is there an argument now to collect Sky miles over United miles if you're mainly flying domestically and you have a Delta card, you get 15% off? Like, I don't know, man, because just literally looking at the numbers here, so median, both international and domestic, so median together for Delta economy, 1.09. For United is 1.00, and that is database, man. Like, should I be collecting Sky miles and not United miles?
Well, I think this goes back to what you're redeeming for, because like if you toggle that to international, the numbers for United are significantly higher. So like I think we always talk about, that there's no blanket answer to these sorts of questions. What's the best credit card? All this stuff. Like, it's all based on patterns. People are like, oh, what card should I get? It's like, well, I need information. Like, do you want to visit your mom in Phoenix or do you want to go to Japan? Like, those are two completely different earning and burning strategies.
Yeah, it really comes down to where his mom wants me to come see her this week. And am I going to use United?
What? What was that? What?
And the private life comes public right into the middle of the show. Love it. Julian is speechless for the first time ever in his life.
Yeah. Let's go back and talk about that other thing you were talking about. No, I think that's exactly right, Ed. Is that people say, well, what card should I get or what kind of miles should I collect? My question is always, well, where do you want to go and how do you want to get there? Because I think that really drives the decision. When it comes to economy, domestic, I don't think you're getting a whole lot of upside collecting United miles over Delta miles. I think you are getting a little more upside with American. But if you're going international, especially if you're looking at a premium class, then that completely changes.
Well, and I think this comes back to, we've always talked generally about the value of 2 cents per mile. And some people are like, well, why do you think miles are worth 2 cents? Like, I don't think miles are worth 2 cents. I'm saying that typically you could earn 2% cash back. And so we've always used that as a barometer, as I think you guys have. And so, this equation, like Richard said, maybe you shouldn't be collecting United miles if you're going to be traveling domestically. And that's a pattern that I've seen develop. Like our flights to Orlando that used to be dirt cheap on miles now much more resemble the Delta model of, call it 1.1 cents per mile towards a fare. Now, I'm flying to Japan. Actually, probably by the time this episode lands, I'll be there. And I got significantly higher value for that ticket. And at different values. Like some of them were tickets I used miles on. Others were tickets where I used miles and plus points. But any way you slice it, much higher than 1.1 cents. But it's also why I'm paying cash when I fly to Orlando with my family on United. And I think your data supports that.
Another thing to keep in mind, speaking of, where you're flying to and how you're getting there, this data is very U.S. centric because the PointsPath's audience is very U.S. centric. So we talked about just now, Air Canada, I believe we have at 1.55. That's certainly accurate if you're a U.S.-based flyer and mostly looking at partner redemptions using Air Canada. If you're based in Canada and you're looking at domestic Canadian routes, it would be nowhere near that good because those are much, much higher. So again, comes down to where are you flying to and also where you're flying from.
Yeah, and I think one other bit of nuance that's not baked into the dashboard is in some cases, we know that those Aeroplan surcharges can be higher than, say, United's. And for a true apples to apples comparison, people should be folding that into the equation. If it's 20,000 less miles, but a $300 surcharge, you've got to do that math and make sure it makes sense for you.
Which we do that math on PointsPath itself, obviously not in this dashboard of data. But when we tell you whether points or cash is the better deal, we're deducting that tax from the cash amount before we do the comparison, so that we are getting how much are you actually saving by using points.
So Richard, a lot of these airlines are partners with your day job, Built Rewards. And I guess, from your standpoint, any surprises here in terms of where the values come in? We talked a little bit about the big three. We talked about Air Canada and Alaska, but, like Air France and JetBlue are two others that are on here. How do you feel about what you're seeing for those numbers here in PointsPath?
Yeah, I'm excited to show one group in particular these results. Those are my fellow employees of the day job over at Built Rewards, because what I've learned is, just like everyday life out there, some people are like, I am only flying United, right? Everybody that works for Built lives in New York except for like three of us, and they're like, I'm only going to Newark. I'm never going to LaGuardia JFK. I'm only flying United. I'm like, yeah, but you can fly American for 1/3 of the miles to wherever you're going. They're like, I don't care. And I'm like, okay, look at this data set here. You guys all love data in the day job. That just proves, quantifiably proves how dumb you are for continuing to do that.
Ladies and gentlemen, Richard calling his coworkers dumb, right?
I was going to say, I could see why he's
To be fair, they call me
work.
dumb 3 times a day. Now, they happen to be correct, whereas I
Yeah.
have to show data sets to prove why I'm correct. They can just call me that and say that's correct. But I mean, it's just people are so loyal. There's no surprises here to me in the value, and it just makes it that much easier to show folks like, hey, that's great. You want to fly United? Please just look at Aeroplan before you look at United.com, and here's a quantifiable reason why you should do that.
Yeah, the only thing I would say, the only surprise for me, and maybe it's just because it's a very small sample of data so far, is I did think that the Air France numbers might be higher. They're coming in right around a penny a point. And my guess would be, because I know that there's not a ton of data in there yet on Air France, my guess would be that we would see the business class fares start to skew up much higher there, because I do think there's a ton of value in Air France business class.
So there's two things about that. Yeah, first of all, it's a very small sample set. We just released the beta of Air France about a week ago, so there's only a couple of thousand flights in there that you're looking at. But also remember, when you are searching with Air France, if you've searched on the Flying Blue site, you get some great business deals and some great deals, and then you get some horrible ones, right? Then there's some that are like, this one's 1,000,000 points, right? That all gets folded into our data. So I think that's also putting some downward pressure on that median. Just some of those hugely overpriced flights are pulling the value down.
Yeah. No, good point. Good point. I think, like when I look at this overall, Richard, let's loop back on something you said, because I think it's an interesting concept. So looking at this data and thinking about, as you noted appropriately, like the value for, say, United domestic miles has dropped. Do you think that, let me make sure I phrase it right, we know that American has had some, it's become harder to find pockets of value for American on international flights. I was lucky enough to find my Japan Airlines redemption. You found that great flight to, I think you're going to Jackson Hole, but it seems harder to find those values going forward. It's also harder to earn American miles. Do you think, based on this data, it's still worth it for folks? Like, who, maybe a better way to say it, who should be collecting American miles based on this data, with their points being worth more, but where there's like very narrow bands where you can get that value?
Look, I still think that everybody should be collecting American miles. It is still the easiest, in my opinion, to get value from the program. It's not necessarily tied to revenue prices. You can still find last minute deals, whereas if you want to travel within 7 days with United or Delta miles, it's not going to happen. And they're not going to release any space 7 days into partner, so you're kind of out of luck there. So everybody should be collecting American miles is, the short answer to that. I'll say what I've noticed more than like miles are going down in value for United or whoever is there are pockets of deals out there, but they are just at the most inopportune times to fly. Like the reason that we were flying to Jackson Hole for 5,000 miles is because it's Wednesday departing at 7 a.m. and you got one connection in Charlotte and you're on. Like, I was literally, while you guys were talking, pulling back up flights from Newark to Atlanta for a family of 4. And it's like, hey, if you want to fly at 6 a.m. from Newark to Atlanta, you can do it for 9,200 miles a person. If you want to fly at any reasonable time, it jumps up to 20,000. So it's just like a convenience tax is almost what I see more than, hey, across the board, X, Y, or Z is happening.
To be
Yeah, and
clear,
something-
I never ever want to fly at 6 a.m.
I don't recommend it.
Something else we want to add to this dashboard are filters for not only connections to say, all right, well, show me what the value is for non-stops, one stops, two
Yeah.
stops, but also time of day, right? So then you say, okay, well, am I, based on the data, getting more value for that 6 a.m. flight or that 11 p.m. flight? Probably. I think that's exactly right. It comes down to, because remember, when we're putting this data together, everything is in there and everything is weighted equally. So, when Richard said, oh, I found this, terrific deal to Jackson Hole, but there were also hundreds of other flights, probably as you searched, that were terrible. Or that, were mediocre at best, we'll say. Right? And you just sort of, when you're searching, you just say, no. That's all in this data, though. And that really is where you get a true median value. It doesn't mean you can't get outsized value. You just have to be flexible and really do your homework.
An off-the-wall question. I don't know. I don't have an answer to this after 3 years of being on the business side. American and United routinely now show you 2-stop domestic itineraries. The latest example was flying up to Boston to see our buddy Howie while he's up there. And it's like on American, you can go from Atlanta to Charlotte, Charlotte to JFK, JFK to Boston. And that'll cost you 7,000 American miles. If you want to go Atlanta to Boston, that'll be 75,000. Like, how is it financially feasible that you'd have somebody fly 3 legs and charge them half the miles? Like, why does that work? This is in no way relevant to this data set, but like, I just need to know an answer to this from if anybody's out there listening to revenue management. Like, how does that work?
Yeah, I think we refer to that as sort of like the basic economy version of pricing fares. It's like, we want to make this so bad that you'll never click on it and you'll click on something else for more miles.
But they're incentivizing you to do it, right? So it's like the fuel to fly me on 3 legs is somehow less miles. I don't know. Like, I guess
the biggest thing I find with my work colleagues is this like strong aversion to connecting flights. And like, look, I mean, nobody here likes connecting flights, but I think we all realize that they're just sort of like part and parcel of the course. And I've had employees be like, wow, gosh, it's $500 cheaper to connect, but I'd still rather, fly the nonstop. So I'll just travel some other day when the flights are cheaper. Like, they just hate connecting. And I think that double connection for next to nothing is the airline's way of saying, see, look, we have something that's a nice price for you that nobody's ever going to book. Like, how many people, I would love to know how many people actually book that triple connection to Boston from Atlanta.
That's why I always wonder, have you ever taken a Southwest flight and sat next to somebody who's like, yep, this is my 3rd leg to get from, Albuquerque to Orlando.
That
and
used to be the way
for the day.
Yeah, that used to be the way. You were like, it was like the mail service going across the country. You'd like 4 dots to get there.
Like, you guys are doing 4 legs to get to Orlando? Like, holy moly. It sounds miserable.
Yeah, it really does sound miserable. Maybe with the party row in the back where the orange seats that faced each other, then maybe 4 legs wouldn't be so horrible.
Is that what it's called? It's called the party row? Because you
That's
can
what I
face the
call
person
it,
across
because
from
we
you.
used to party back there.
I don't want to know what a party on a Southwest plane is, but I'm not old enough to know that. I'll leave that to you two guys.
Did you?
It has nothing to do with age. I don't know either. I want to be clear. I don't know.
Well, no, that could have something to do with age. Well, you're prestigious, so that's your excuse.
That's
but, like,
correct.
Richard, were you
That's
even
right.
old enough to fly a Southwest flight that had the rear-facing seats in the back row?
No, but my very first flight was on Air South in a 737-300 from Atlanta to Columbia, South Carolina, and the first 2 rows faced each other. So I was in row 1 on my very first flight ever, facing my parents in row 2. So I remember that. I was old enough for that. And everybody go look up the Wikipedia article on Air South that was based in Atlanta. Rest in peace.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever. Well, actually, no, I have done front row, rear-facing seats, but those were on like the old. Oh gosh, what were they, like maybe Dash 800s or Dash 400s on United US Airways? Yeah, I know. I'm saying I never flew that on.
That was the Pan Am
707,
1952.
Yeah, no, rear-facing seats on Southwest, man, they were the jam. That back row, you got 6 seats party row.
I hear there's some big Southwest news coming out, even maybe perhaps today at time of recording, that unfortunately is not going to be in next week's episode. So I've seen it teased on social media a few times, and I'm not sure what's coming out there.
Yeah, there's been some initial comments that it might have just been an announcement about like flights for SEC football games, so it might not be a massive announcement. We might have gotten bamboozled, so we'll have to see.
A lot of churn over there at Southwest these days on the investor and leadership side. So whenever I see those things now for Southwest, my attention is peaked.
Yep. All right. Well, I know we all have stuff to do, Mr. Kheel. I just want to thank you very much for your offer to provide exclusive access to the members of the Slack community. this data. We will be taking you up on that. It was as heard here on the Miles to Go podcast, and as Richard is my witness. If you guys do want to support the show, a couple bucks a month, you can join us. We have weekly or almost weekly happy hours, meetups where you get to talk with quote unquote travel experts, just like the three of us. It's pretty exciting stuff.
Richard, I just want to say I'm glad to see you back from your contract dispute. I know you have to play out your 5th year. It's okay. You'll at the end you'll be able to really you take your services anywhere. I think that's great. So I think you made the right choice coming back in.
Yeah, Ed made a qualifying offer, so we avoided arbitration. But I'll be a free agent at the end of the season, and
right.
Look forward to.
I know some people on other podcasts, so let me know. And
look, since it's now public, and Richard has claimed on air that he is a free agent at the end of the season, we'll just say that this pickleball injury is definitely going to cost you something for value of the next contract.
I'll pass the physical with flying colors by the time free agency.
He's got some time to heal. He's got some time.
But this is the first major injury that you've had, and I think it's going to weigh heavily on the free agency market.
People that hate sports ball have no idea what's going on right now.
Don't worry, it's not just people that hate sports ball that have no idea what's going on right now, other than the three of us. Mr. Kheel, it is always fun to have you on the show. I appreciate you filling in during Richard's contract dispute, and we can't wait to have you back. As a fan and supporter and investor in Points Path, certainly I'm biased, but I really love what you guys are building.
Thank you. And thanks, by the way, because I know a lot of people who listen to this use Points Path and have reached out to me and told me, that they love it. Thank you to all of you, right? Like we're building something, and, we're figuring it out as we go to some degree. And the feedback is terrific. So please, Julian@pointspath.com. Julian@pointspath.com. Feel free, drop me a line if you have feedback, something you want to share about PointsPath. Love to hear from our users.
Most important is this episode drops on Wednesday, which is half off Dave & Buster's. So, Julian, I will see you at the Times Square Dave & Buster's next Wednesday with the Kerr family for half off.
All right. I may have someone in tow as well, because she loves her some Dave & Buster's.
Looking forward.
We made it this far without any jokes, so we're gonna leave it there. And this would normally be where I would insert some nice glowing words of thank you to Mr. Kerr, but it does seem like we're out of time.
I don't recall this being a part of the show, but you're welcome.
Well, hopefully I'll be knee-deep in Tokyo Disney Fantasy Springs when this episode drops. Mr. Kerr will be hobbling his way through the airport, and we are desperately hoping to have video footage of that. And Mr. Kheel will be lining up in front of the token machine at Dave & Buster's. We all have our priorities here. Julian, thanks for stopping by. Mr. Kerr, can't wait to catch up with you on Japan when I'm back from there. But until we upload again, we've got miles to go. Hey guys, welcome back to the...
This is a good start. That's a good start, Ed.
How
many years have you been doing this? How many years?